Hey everyone, welcome to the Business Growth Pod. I'm your host, Alan Draper. Excited for yet another episode. Excited to see what we can add to your entrepreneurial endeavors and what we can do to help you get one step closer to building your business. I'm excited for our guest today. His name is Rick Mayo, and Rick is the CEO of Alloy Personal Training Center. We're going to get into that a little bit. Let me read you a little bit about what got him to where he is today. Since 1992, Rick has been operating a personal training business a long time, Alloy Personal Training Center. In the past decade, he and his team began helping major brands and independent gyms, health clubs, and fitness businesses around the world deploy personal training systems through a licensing model, which is underneath the Alloy brand. And since then, the Alloy Personal Training System solutions, platforms, and know-how have been used to serve millions of members in thousands of fitness centers. So very glad to have you. Welcome to the show, Rick.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So since 92, I think that's amazing that you found something that, has kind of earned and attracted your attention for that long. Is it because of your passion about the fitness industry? Is it just your passion about business? Is there some combination?
I think it's a combination. When we first started, I was a junior in college, and it was really just a passion for fitness. Like a lot of young people, I got into some kind of strength conditioning for sports. Figured out that I wasn't as good as I had hoped in sports, but I was actually pretty good at the conditioning part, and I enjoyed it. And it was really the birth of the industry was right when I was sort of getting rolling and figuring out that I could charge a premium for some of my time to meet with someone and guide them through a health and fitness program based on their goals. So it was sort of the birth of personal training. It was early innings. I mean, imagine no internet, which is like obscene to think about these days. But that's sort of that was what was going on in the world, and we opened a small personal training center. And the idea was that instead of me bouncing around and training people in their homes and various health clubs, could we put a customer experience in four walls around this high-end service of personal training? And recruited a few buddies of mine and thought, hey, this will be pretty neat. And still in school, and opened the business on a shoestring budget. And we really just hit the right market at the right time. And, we grew, we doubled our space between 92 and 98. We had a bit of a hiccup in 98, a pretty big one, actually, which in hindsight became the impetus for what became a systematic approach to the business, right? That became then our licensing, which is now a full-on franchise. So what nearly sunk us from lack of business systems and not running things with integrity, I would say it became one of the best things that ever happened to us. And I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this, I know that maybe they're early stages, but you're going to find that some of the tougher times that you go through like that, if you think of them as opportunities to get better, they may truly be the best thing that's happened to you. You won't know it when you're going through it, but in hindsight, you might see it that way if you can just stick it out. So certainly that was the case for us. About, like I mentioned, it's been 12 years ago now. I was doing a lot of consulting, speaking. I do a lot of speaking in the industry internationally, domestically, probably 20 talks a year. At one point, I was doing on the road like 40 weeks out of the year, a crazy schedule. And that led to people saying, hey, can you build us a sales system, for our fitness center? Can you write our workouts? A lot of different, options and sort of part and parcel of the things that we do. And so, because of that, we thought, well, wouldn't it be better if we just tidy things up, put it on an online platform, and just created a licensing? And so we would do some consulting on the front end, and then ultimately we would take to market a license, and we would power other brands with that. We did that to the tune of 2,500 clubs worldwide. I mean, everywhere from India, Cyprus, Dubai, Tasmania, you name it. It's fun to say all the crazy places, right? But most of them are right here in the US, Canada, Central America, you name it. And we learned a lot. And then what that led to was then I ended up on the advisory board for some of the biggest fitness franchises in the world, like an Anytime Fitness, which I'm really proud to say that, we restructured their floor plan and taught them how to run a coaching program, deploy and operationalize coaching within that brand. And that gave us a really big peek under the covers at what franchising looks like, the do's and don'ts, if you will. And they do a great job with it. And so it's like, all right, good, great experience. Same thing with Gold's Gym, by the way. And then eventually Boutique Fitness came to us and said, look, can you design our workouts and our sales systems? I'm like, look, if we're going to do it for people like us, which is Boutique Fitness, let's pivot to full franchising. So we made that decision in 2019, really jumped it off at the start of 2020, which everyone knows is an amazing year to be in the fitness business.
Yeah, exactly.
Pandemic hit like 2 months into the year. I think we sold 8 in the first month. 8 licenses is what they're called, which is interchangeable with our other business, but really think about 6 franchise locations. And these are like brick and mortars, like McDonald's, like names on the door, there it is, right? And so 8 in the first month, I'm like, this is like candy from a baby, right? And then, of course, COVID hit and we pretty much shut down sales. There were states that weren't even allowing fitness to operate. So there's no point in trying to sell it. So we shut that down, focused. We're still servicing that legacy revenue from our licensing business. So we focused on helping those folks get through the pandemic with technological solutions or whatnot, and then back on it. So now we've got 50 plus sold. We started probably early 2021. So a little over a year. So 50 plus locations sold. We'll have 10 open here in a couple of weeks. And yeah, everything's so far so good, but it's been a long, interesting journey. I'm sitting in the exact same location that we were in 30 years ago, by the way. Like
really?
My corporate office is now where my original gym was. So you talk about somebody that can grind, do boring work. It's like, I've been in literally in the same building for 30 years. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think a big part of being a successful entrepreneur is understanding which things need to change and which things need to stay the same. And there aren't a lot of industries that got hit as hard as gyms, some hospitality, restaurants, but they got hit as hard as gyms during COVID. What are some things that you were able to accomplish, that you were able to do or pivot with during COVID, not just to make it work operationally, but to also keep positivity, have some sense of, productivity with your teams and with your franchisees?
Yeah, I think, as you know, if you have a plan and you're working that plan, that feels like momentum, right? And I think for us, we had 2 things working for us. So first of all, our model by design is small. So the footprint is small and the clientele is small. So there's a million fitness franchises, just like there are food. So it's sort of like, the big question is like, what makes you different? It's like, well, we target a different avatar. So we target 45 to 65. Why? Because they have money and personal training is expensive. Now we service our personal training in a 6-to-1 coach to client ratio. So that makes a good value proposition to the right customer avatar. So say you're in Atlanta, you might pay on average $100 an hour for a personal trainer. But in our model, you might pay as little as 30, right? So it's a good value to the right person, but it's still $300+ a month. So because of that, a healthy model for us is 130 to 150 members, right? Well, there's science behind that. There's a number called Dunbar's number. I don't know if you've heard of it. I think the scientist who's out of the UK, his name's Robin Dunbar, I believe. And it's called Dunbar's number, or sometimes the rule of 150. And basically what it means is that there's a certain number of people that you can have meaningful relationships with outside of very close friends and family. So take your immediate family and your close friends and take them out. How many more people can you really maintain a good relationship with? And that number turns out from the beginning of time through studies until now is 150 people. So we were fortunate to be sitting on that model, Alan, because what that does is it inherently drives a higher amount of trust, right? So when we were allowed to start reopening in some of these areas, are these people going to come back to the gym, or out of fear, are they going to stay out of the gym? And it was interesting because we fared better than a lot of other fitness brands just because of the small number of people. People know each other really well. You know the members, you know their names, you know the spouses' names, their kids' names, they know yours. And even though none of those things, as we know scientifically, don't prevent you from catching a virus, there's just more inherent trust. So it really helped us get back up to speed. So that was one factor that helped us. The other one was that we were sitting on the perfect technological solution. So we have an amazing app. And typically what the app does, there's a coach facing piece that allows us to train 6 people. So imagine 6 tiles pop up on a screen that says, here's Alan, here's his level of fitness and his do's and his don'ts. Then we can toggle over and there's your program, right? So that's all running on an iPad for a coach. That allows us to train 6 people and still do personal training. Well, there's also a client-facing piece of that. And that does everything from pulls in wearables to MyFitnessPal for nutrition tracking, habit change. Typically, how we were using it before the pandemic was to drive like that third workout a week, or, hey, I'm going, our clients have financial resources. So let's say you're in Phoenix like you, and you're like, hey, I'm getting the heck out of here. This is like our winter. It's way too hot. I'm headed to Idaho, for the summer, which would be like the Northeast version of like I'm going to Florida for the winter, right? And then you would say to them, if you were their coach, you don't want to lose that revenue, but you also don't want that customer to lose their results. So they're saying, well, hey, just take me off the schedule for 3 months. Well, you're going to lose your spot because we have true scarcity. There's only a certain amount of spots, and we pre-sell these gyms nearly full, right? So it's like there's not any more spots. So I don't want you to lose your spot, and I don't want you to lose the fitness that you've gained. So let's do this. And we would build a workout for them to do on their own with habit change. And maybe it's based on the condo they own and the equipment they have available, that type of thing. But as it turns out, it was the perfect tool when COVID jumped off. So instead of being able to say, or instead of being forced to do Zoom classes, which was a lot of fitness brands were doing, we were able to continue to do personal training just through this technology. So I would know what your injuries are, what your goals are, what type of equipment you had at home, and I'd be able to send you something to specific. And then we just built more touch points on check-ins or whatnot. And that allowed us to, even when we weren't open and our licensees, to continue to realize revenue through personal training services, just like an online trainer would, right? So it would just happen to be the perfect tool for that.
I think that some businesses, and I own a couple that just had a few things going for them, and I'd like to claim all the credit, but I didn't know COVID was going to happen, right? And it sounds like these tools that you had in place, they didn't really have anything to do with COVID, right? They were already there and just kind of helped you streamline your business during that time, keep it up and running. One thing that I noticed, Rick, was communication with the team got really interesting during COVID, especially in the early days. And I made what some thought was a mistake. And I guess I could see it as that, where the first time I spoke to one of my companies about COVID, I expressed some level of optimism, something like, hey, everything's going to be okay. We're going to work our way through this. Your jobs are going to be safe. And that rubbed some people the wrong way. Some people wanted to hear just the doom and gloom that they'd been hearing on the news. And that's not the message that I wanted to share with them that day. How, if at all, did your communication and your leadership style change at all during COVID, just with all the social issues that seem to be hot spots for sensitivity and whatever, which I totally get. But how do you cater to what's kind of happening socially in terms of adjusting leadership style and communication?
Yeah, I think storytelling is a great way. It's a compelling way to communicate an idea, whether it's marketing or to your team. And I made the same mistake, Alan, as you. And I think I came out with this Pollyanna attitude of like everything's going to be fine. Let's just buckle down. We're here together. And I just don't think people were ready to hear it. And as entrepreneurs, I think listen, at the end of the day, we certainly mitigate the downside and understand that. But I think ultimately we're pretty optimistic people, right? And so I think it rubs people the wrong way when they just don't want to hear it, right? For whatever reason. And they're just stuck in that mire of like, whatever. And so what I did is I used a series of talks that I saw from Jim Collins. He's the author of Good to Great and Great by Choice. And he did a 3-part series for a business coaching group that I was a member of. I was in a Vistage group for a while. And so for Vistage, which is a worldwide organization, Jim Collins did a 3-part series. And I used that with our teams. And it was really great. And the first part of the series was something called the Socktail Paradox. And the Socktail Paradox was named after James Stockdale, who was he was a pilot. He was shot down during Vietnam, and he spent a lot of time in what they called the Hanoi Hilton, which was a terrible, POW camp in Vietnam. He was the senior most ranking officer there, right? And so, as you can imagine, he received the most scrutiny. He was responsible not only for the most, punishment. I mean, he would receive the most punishment, torture, and he was held responsible then for his entire crew, anybody that was in the military that was under his charge that was in that prison. And so, one thing that Stockdale did well when he was being interviewed by Jim Collins, he was a big fan of the Stoics, as am I. And so he kind of asked him, listen, why is it that you fared so well when you came out of this relatively unscathed based on how horrible your experience was? I mean, he went through some terrible things, like, trying to be coerced into speaking, and he would bash his face into with a stool and break his nose and bash his whole face and, cut himself up just so that they couldn't put him on camera in the dog and pony show. I mean, he was that guy. So brutal, right? And he said, well, listen, here's the paradox. Like, ultimately, I knew that I was going to get out of this someday. I didn't know when, I didn't know what it was going to look like, but I was confident that someday we would make it out of this. And when we did, I knew that I would be better off for it. I would learn things about myself, and I would use this as an opportunity to grow, and I would be a much better person, leader, husband, whatever that might be when I get out. That being said, I'm well rooted in the realities that we can be pulled out and tortured at any time. We don't know how long we're going to be here. It could be a year, it could be 10 years, and it's going to be absolutely horrific. And that's the healthy paradox, right? So I showed that to my team, and we sort of tried to explain it through the lens of what we do. It's like, yes, it sucks. I'm not trying to be too Pollyanna and ignore the fact that it's scary. And, I'm not very fear-based. So for me, it's easy to be like, we'll be fine. But that's not how everyone feels, as you know. So yes, it's terrible right now. I'm confident that we're going to make it out of this intact as a company. And I think we're going to be much better off when we do, right? So I literally showed them the 10-minute talk from Jim Collins. We discussed that as a group, and that was super helpful. And we went into another series about like, what things do you protect? Like, he used a Churchill, I believe, to talk about World War II, where he was saying, listen, France needs us to commit some air power to the war. What if Germany runs through France? What are we going to do? How many squadrons do we need to hold back to protect the island of the UK, right? And his commander said 25 squadrons. And of course, history, as we know, Germany ran through France quickly. And had they not held back those 25 squadrons, right, they wouldn't have survived the Battle of Britain. And I mean, I think that's where the famous saying, no time in history have so many, owed so much to so few. That was about the Royal Air Force and what they did to hold off the Germans. And so he uses that analogy to say, what is it that you need to protect during this time, during COVID? Like, you need to put a moat around your castle. What is in there? And things like reputation, like, let's not do anything to harm our reputation, right? Certainly money. Like, it was like what Warren Buffett says, like, you never know who's swimming naked till the tide goes out. Well, the tide went out fast. And if you were personally overextended, or you were doing things in your business, like, hey, get while the getting's good, and things looked so great, you got overextended, you weren't disciplined, held back a bit, you were exposed. And so I think, financial resources, I think even more important, brand integrity, your team, like, who on my team am I going to keep no matter what, right? Fight for. So we just went through a series, and the last one was, I think, the 20-mile march, which speaks to like getting up and grinding a little bit every day, right? And we use the polar exploration from Armand and I think it's Scott. And Armand got up and did 20 miles every day, regardless of the weather. They're racing to see who could make it to the South Pole. And Scott kind of went way ahead when the weather was good and held back, right? Which is sort of the frenetic pace. Armandson got there a few days before, and Scott's entire team perished on the way back. Whether it was just they were bummed because they didn't get there or whatever it was. But that surging pace didn't work. So the whole idea was like, okay, we're going to be fine. I know it sucks. It's scary, but we're all going to be fine. What do we want to protect? And then what can we do that's right in front of us where we can just put one foot in front of the other and just keep marching, even if days are terrible, right? And I think me not saying it and not being too Pollyanna about the future made them feel more comfortable. And it seemed to really land, and we did a series, like we'll show this video, we'll show it to our customers and our customer base. We'll do a talk about how we feel about it around our industry. We'll show the next one, do the same thing. And that really landed well. And usually I suck at that because I'm not a real touchy-feely guy, but that actually worked out pretty well.
Yeah, that's great. I think when you run a business, you naturally have, a target on your back, so to speak. And during COVID, a lot of weird things happened where the people that were coming after you were, from different angles, and business just got really interesting. Um, and one thing that I started to consider a lot during COVID was, which are the battles that I'm going to take on and which are the ones that I'm going to let go. And as entrepreneurs and as business owners, we owe, a lot of times people don't realize this, but we owe duties to different people. And ultimately, the larger your company gets, the more you're responsible for in terms of all sorts of things, in terms of giving back to your community, in terms of helping people live a life where they feel, some level of fulfillment, they're continuing to progress. And, I started to struggle a little bit with deciding which of, the proverbial holes in the boat I was going to focus on filling. And, a lot of gyms across the United States, not a lot, but a couple made national news, right? I think there was one in New Jersey that just absolutely refused to close their doors. But I think generally in most states, gyms were closed at least for some period of time. I know mine was in Arizona for an extended period of time. As a business owner, how do you decide what's your thought process, and what does that analysis look like when you're trying to decide, hey, which of these battles am I going to take on? I know I face this with, sometimes I'll hear something that an employee did, or I'll hear that, a customer disrespected a member of the team, or I have a partner that's disgruntled about, a business decision that we've made. What's your process for figuring out which battles you decide to take on and which ones you kind of just let fly under the radar?
I think it has a lot to do with maybe what we were talking about before, right? Like, what are you putting a moat around? Like, what are you not willing to give up no matter how bad things get? For me, it was like our integrity as a brand. I wasn't willing to do anything, underhanded, sneaky. There's no hidden motivations. Listen, during COVID, what made it so difficult is you were now pulling conversations into business that you would normally never have. You would never have a political conversation, right?
Exactly.
In your business ever. And by default, like just by choosing to be open, you were then seen as drawing a line and picking a team, right? Which was crazy. I was just trying to do my best. So I would say for us, that's $1 million question. I wish I had a really thoughtful answer for you, Alan, but I think it would just depend. It depended on what it was. And it almost seemed like on the daily, because no one had ever been through something like this before. Now, what I wasn't willing to do, because in entrepreneurship, you understand this, feelings are fleeting, right? You cannot go online and just, pop off about your political leanings or it's just not a smart decision. I know you want to, and I know behind closed doors in your home, you probably have very pointed opinions. We all do, right? But there is absolutely zero reason for you to jump on social media and use an opportunity for you to talk about your political leanings. It's immature. It's showing that you don't have control of your emotions, that those are stronger than your mind, which is not a good trait for entrepreneurship, right? So I think for us, using that as a lens and saying, okay, we're not going to go there. We're going to do our best. And if we're not going to be baited into having a conversation with a customer or an employee around this, we're going to be as kind as we can. We're going to be very firm, and we're going to keep our customers' best interest and our employees' best interest in mind the best we can. But not everyone's going to love it. And we, again, like that Socktail Paradox, it's not going to be fun. We have to brace ourselves for the fact that we're now pulling conversations into our business that are, in my mind, completely unnecessary and have nothing to do with our decisions. We're just trying to help the people that want help in our communities with health and fitness, and hopefully not burn too many bridges in the process. So just do our best, be transparent, take it on the chin. If someone doesn't like it, it's the way it's going to be, right? You're not going to please everyone.
100%. And I think it's difficult because I see things changing. The rising workforce, They have different motivations. I'm learning that, younger people, they'll live with their parents as opposed to getting an apartment, moving out on their own. As long as they can do something that they're passionate about, they feel like they're making a difference in the world. And there's a lot of, quote unquote, old school business owners that, they're digging in their heels and they're saying, no, we're not going to cater to that. It's my way or the highway. We're going to keep things the way they are. And the best business owners are the ones that are able to evolve and pivot, whether they like it or not. I mean, and you hit the nail on the head. I personally have very strong political and economic beliefs about the government where I think they did things right, where I, think they did things wrong. But as leaders and with individuals that may look up to us and may depend on us for, some level of security, it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird for me to say this, but I feel like sometimes we owe them a duty of not saying what we think. But it's so tough to know exactly, when that is. When do we say something that may not be the popular opinion? And when do we hold that in? And it's those tough decisions, it's those gray areas that make the most successful leaders exactly that, the most successful. Wanted to shift gears just a little bit because I think the evolution of Alloy is very interesting. I think it's interesting. You referenced Jim Collins. He talks a lot about the hedgehog concept in Good to Great. And the hedgehog concept for our listeners is the intersection of three, like if you could picture three circles, like a Venn diagram, it's the intersection of what drives your economic engine, what you're passionate about, and what you can be the best in the world at. And the center point of that intersection, those three circles, is what you should be doing with your business. And as time goes on, all the best businesses, they were able to pivot, which means they'll put, one foot in, on the ground, and they'll just kind of move their business around that, what we hope to be the hedgehog concept, and really dig into that while they're making changes. Now, you've been able to make quite substantial changes since 92. What has been your thought process as you've arrived at that spot where you're like, hey, here's an opportunity, we need to take it? What has allowed you to do that? Because I see a lot of business owners, they just keep doing what they've always done. And when things change, just doing what you've always done could really cause significant harm to your business. So what was it? What was the thought process? What gave you the courage? What kind of just pushed you over the edge to say, okay, now's the time to act?
Well, I think first, for anyone listening, like, I hope you can do it much faster than I did, of course. I mean, opening in 92, it's like on one hand, I'm really proud of it. On the other hand, that's a long time ago. It's funny. I'll do a lot of speaking in the fitness industry, and I'm like, raise your hand if you were born before 1992. And it's maybe a third of the crowd. And I'm like, okay. So while you were a twinkle in your dad's eye, I was already doing this business, And so in so many ways, I'm still doing the same thing, but it's a completely different iteration of that. And I think, as long as you have a culture, and it seems this pie in the sky kumbaya stuff, but it really does matter. Like, what is your culture? What are your core values? One of ours is drive change, and change is very difficult. I don't care what anyone says. People hate it. Like, I like it, but I'm the one driving it. So of course I like it. But, it's one of those things that we give lip service to, but it's really important because you have to have a culture where if an opportunity arises, you can pivot and pursue that opportunity, that people aren't so entrenched and you don't hear things in the workplace like, well, this is the way we've always done things, or why are we changing this? It's like, we're always looking. It really is about like this constant evolution and trying to get better. And so I think what ends up happening over time is that maybe the people that don't do this, that don't evolve, and the ones that do is that there's this relationship between a skill set and an opportunity vehicle, right? And so over time, you have to upskill yourself. And in doing so, then you will create a better opportunity vehicle, but you have to move into it. So like, we coach a lot of business owners, like you said, they're in the same spot. So they may be at a 6 on their skill set because they've been at it for a long time. And maybe they've taken some business courses and now they know marketing and they know these other things. but they never take a shot at moving up their opportunity vehicle. And really, when you look at, if you want a fulfilled life and the brain science behind being happy, like the Huberman, Dr. Huberman from Stanford University just did a huge study on this. And basically, the way your brain chemistry works, it's not even temporary, it's a long lasting change in your brain, is that you set forth a very difficult challenge, it could be physical, professional, spiritual, whatever that may be. And you work hard, and that's important, to overcome that challenge. And there's a brain chemistry change when that happens that's permanent. And then the next step is you push the goalpost out further. And then you go for that, and you push the goalpost out further, right? And you should do that from now until when you're not even breathing anymore, like when you're in the ground. That is the true key to happiness. And so what you have to understand is, to be able to evolve your business over time, it's about being very curious, a lifelong learner, right? And constantly upskilling yourself. And when you do that, you will see that there are other opportunity vehicles for you. So if you look at, we're one brick and mortar when we opened, we're multiple brick and mortars. Now we're consulting. Now we're licensing. Now we're full on franchising. I mean, it's an evolution, but none of those came without myself and the rest of my team and the people we hired around us acquiring more skills and leveling up over time. And that just comes from being a lifelong learner and being super curious. I mean, if you told me when I was in college as an exercise science major that I'd be taking Harvard courses on disruptive innovation at some point online voluntarily, I'd be like, no shot. That sounds like the worst thing. I'd rather have a root canal. But I love that stuff now, right? Because you have to upskill yourself. And in doing so, you should then create opportunity vehicles that are more lucrative for you, whatever those are. So I think you can't really do the other. I mean, I don't like the fake it till you make it. I know, like, an attitude wise, maybe, but you really can't do something that you just haven't earned, put it that way, right? So the skills come first, and then right behind it, you just keep moving. And basically that's your entire life stacked on top of each other. And if you do that, you'll be pretty damn happy.
Yeah, that's interesting because, I recently read a book called The Gap and the Gain, and it kind of addresses this, how it's really natural for entrepreneurs to do exactly what you just described, where they really push themselves to $1 million in sales, or 2 or 3 branch locations, or whatever the goal is, and then once they get there, they push that goalpost even further. And I've felt both kind of this fulfillment and self-satisfaction, while also feeling like there's always that gap, right? And in this book, the author kind of goes through this process and explains, like, the difference between the fulfilled, the happy entrepreneurs isn't necessarily that, it isn't the difference in the goals or the achievements of any one individual, but in how they view it. And he talks about how the ones that are satisfied, or they feel complete, not complacent, but they feel fulfilled in life, their focus is on the gain, right? So they're looking forward, but mentally they're going through this process of being thankful for where they've come, while they're continuing to look to the next goalpost, right? Which is kind of an interesting dichotomy. So while they're continuing to push themselves, right, and it's something that personally I struggle with, is that I'm not really in it for any particular type of achievement. I'm in it for the next thing, whatever that is. And when I get to the next thing, it's going to be the next thing after that. But through reading this book, exactly. So through reading this book, I'm learning that that's okay. It's okay to be like that. And I think, like you mentioned, you can find a lot of happiness by doing that, as long as you're not, as long as you're saying, hey, I'm sufficient. I've done great things. And focus on that gain versus focusing on the proverbial gap of where you haven't gotten to yet.
I think part of that is learning. I mean, it's very cliche, but it is so dang true, which is like, learn to love the process, right? We just did a talk and a podcast on something called Cantor's Law. So as a professor at Harvard, and Cantor's Law, in essence, it's kind of this obvious thing. I don't even know why you could name this after yourself, but it basically means that everything in the middle looks like failure. And so what the premise is this, like, you come up with an idea. How excited are you when you come up with your idea for your new business? You're like, this is going to be amazing. And then in that process, you also paint this amazing picture for what it will look like, right? And everybody loves a happy ending. Well, as you know, in between the excitement of the idea and the happy ending, if it ever happens, is a shit ton of work. And it feels like failure because it goes 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 forward, 4 back, lateral step, 2 forward, okay, 3 forward. And you've seen the funny graphs about getting from point. You think it goes like this and it goes like this, right? That feels messy. It doesn't feel linear. It doesn't always meet your expectations. It may be that your end game is a little off from where you thought it was. Your happy ending is not what you thought it was. It's something else. But if you learn to love the process itself and you learn that failures are opportunities to learn and all the cliche things, but they're so true. And so there's a reason there's so much information and cliche sayings around loving the process. That's it. And what you'll find, and I've had, again, had you go back and said, listen, you're going to have an opportunity to exit your business, or you're going to have this licensing business that's 2,500 gyms worldwide. When I first opened, I would have told you that you were crazy. And I would have been, just if I could look into the future, I would have been ecstatic with the possibility of that. I will tell you that every milestone I've ever reached, sounds like you're the same, has been absolutely anticlimactic. I tell you, say what you want about Elon Musk. I think one of the favorite things I've ever seen on social media was from him. And it was the day that he became the wealthiest man in the world. And there was a news report on it, and he reposted it on Twitter. And literally his post was like, how about that? ... back to work. It's like, why? What does it even matter? Like, I'm not doing this for a milestone or a sell or a financial, whatever. It's like Simon Sinek's Infinite Games. Like, I'm just in the game because I love the game. Like, I love going to work, trying to build a team. Of course it's hard, but that's the real juice, man. That it's like, that's what makes it beautiful, is that it's so freaking hard, and that you have to control your emotions, and you have to grow as a person. You have to build your skill set. Like, that is what makes it so satisfying. And so as an entrepreneur, you just have to start to realize, and it might take a minute. It took me a while to figure this out, where it's like, God, this is really hard. It's like, well, it's not really hard. It's supposed to be hard. And by the way, that's the beauty of it. And so you kind of come to this over time, and you're like, oh yeah, you're right. So I could be, Alan, just like you, in the most stressful situation, in the middle of COVID or whatever. And if I feel like I'm upskilling and moving forward, I'm happy as a clam. I really am, which sounds crazy because it's like super stressful. But that's what I signed up for, and I'm built for it, and I absolutely love it. And so I hope anybody listening to this, if you're eating shit right now in your business, I hope I can say that, you might have started out with a great idea, and you might have this pie in the sky that you haven't reached. And right now you feel like you are failing. You're just in the middle, man. Just keep going. Right.
Yeah, no, 100%. When I have those moments of clarity where I'm able to really sit down with my thoughts and push some of the stress aside from whatever's happening. When bad things, quote unquote, bad things happen in business or financially to me, every once in a while, not every time, Rick, not every time, I'm getting there, but every once in a while, I find pleasure in it, because it's at those moments when something really bad happens, especially, that I realize that I'm doing something that very few people are willing to do. And because I'm doing something that very few people are willing to do, I'm going to be able to obtain results that very few people are going to be able to obtain. And I feel like the older I get, the longer I'm in the game, especially with this focus on the infinite game, how it's not me arriving somewhere. It's actually the journey. It's actually this process that's refining us, especially as entrepreneurs. I start to feel that, and I appreciate it more. I enjoy those tough days where a decade ago I wouldn't have. And, I think it's really what separates the entrepreneurs who they just go back to work the next day and figure it out with that mentality. I think that's what really separates them from the pack. So.
Yeah. I admitted this post COVID, and it was almost embarrassing, but I was talking to my wife. I'm like, I don't know how to communicate this, but I told her, I'm like, I don't think I would tell anyone. Of course, you've already let the cat out of the bag, but I'm like, I was kind of excited, like to have such a big problem to solve. I really was. And I don't know if it's some kind of a sick, weird entrepreneurial thing that develops, a disease that develops over time. But I can remember sitting there with a massive, we had just launched a franchise, which is not inexpensive. And, it's a very expensive proposition. I'm like, okay, we're now, we changed our trajectory by at least a year based on this, right? Our churn in licensing picked up because, we got this thing mapped out perfectly. Well, as you know, it doesn't work out that way always, certainly in a pandemic. But in a weird way, I had this odd calm that came over me because I'm like, I'm so built for this. I'm so ready for this, right? And it was an exciting challenge at the highest level of my abilities and actually a little bit beyond what I was suited for, and I'm glad I went through it. Like I said, it's like stack skills, keep going, right? I'm much better suited for anything that comes along after that. And I knew I would be. It's like the Socktail Paradox. This sucks, don't get me wrong, but I'm somewhat excited to see what kind of entrepreneur I could become coming out of this. And that was the fun part, right? I know it sounds weird and twisted, but again, I'm not trying to say if your business sank that you weren't built for this either. A lot of it was situational. We were very fortunate in a lot of ways to end up where we were. But for me, I had that weird sixth sense of pleasure as well.
Yeah, 100%. Well, this has been fantastic, Rick. Where can people go to learn more about all the great things that you're accomplishing and everything that Alloy is about and everything that they're accomplishing right now?
Yeah, super simple. Just alloyfranchise.com is our franchising site. There's a form there that you can fill out and reach out to me about anything, really. And then I'm all over social media, so you can find me. We have a podcast as well. It's very niche-y to the fitness business, but actually that's, Alan, how you and I got connected is, we had hired an executive assistant and somehow you're looking for one as well, I think, right? And that's how we landed onto this podcast. So you never know where those lead. So yeah, reach out, guys. I'd love to connect. I teach an entrepreneurship at a local college. I'm a big fan of entrepreneurs and what they do. And I love helping in any way that I can. So I don't have a ton of bandwidth. I'm not doing any more consulting now that we're franchising, but if you have questions or just a shout out or whatever, let me know. I'm a fan and I'll do whatever I can to help you.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Rick, for your time and best of luck in the future.
Likewise. My pleasure.
If you have enjoyed today's podcast, please leave us a rating. And for daily inspiration and business tips, follow Alan on Instagram. Until next time, remember, we build the future one entrepreneur at a time.